What would you do if a wild animal, desperate and alone, looked you straight in the eyes and begged for help? Would you trust your instincts, even if it meant following that creature deep into the unknown wilderness where anything could happen? This is exactly what happened to Park Ranger Michael Thompson on what started as an ordinary Tuesday morning in Yellowstone National Park. Little did he know that one crying bear cub would lead him on a journey that would not only change his life forever, but restore his faith in the incredible bonds that exist between humans and the wild creatures we share this planet with. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications to catch more heartwarming stories like this one. The morning mist was just lifting off the Yellowstone River when Ranger Michael Thompson began his patrol route. With 15 years of experience under his belt, Michael thought he'd seen everything these ancient forests had to offer. Bears fishing for salmon, wolves hunting in coordinated packs, eagles soaring majestically overhead. It was all part of the daily tapestry of life in one of America's most treasured national parks. But as he rounded the bend near Hayden Valley, something caught his attention that made him stop dead in his tracks. There, sitting alone on the edge of the tree line, was a small brown bear cub, and it was crying. Now, if you've never heard a bear cub cry, let me tell you, it's a sound that will pierce straight through to your soul. It's not the growl or roar you might expect, but a desperate, almost human-like wailing that speaks of pure anguish and fear. This little cub, probably no more than 6 months old, was making sounds that would make even the hardest heart break. Michael had encountered countless bear cubs during his career, but always with their protective mothers nearby. A lone cub was not just unusual, it was alarming. In the wild, a cub separated from its mother rarely survives. They depend entirely on their mothers for food, protection, and guidance through their first year of life. As Michael approached cautiously, keeping a safe distance as protocol demanded, the cub did something that defied all his training and experience. Instead of running away, as any wild animal should when confronted with a human, the cub stood up on its hind legs and looked directly at him. Those dark, intelligent eyes were filled with something Michael had never seen in a wild animal before, a desperate plea for help. To understand the profound impact this moment had on Michael, you need to know his story. Growing up in rural Montana, Michael had always felt a deep connection to wildlife. His grandfather, a trapper turned conservationist, had taught him that every creature in the forest had a purpose, a story, and a right to exist peacefully in their natural habitat. But Michael's path to becoming a park ranger hadn't been easy. After losing his younger brother in a hiking accident 10 years earlier, Michael had thrown himself into his work, finding solace in protecting the wilderness that had claimed someone he loved. Every animal he helped, every poacher he stopped, every tourist he guided safely through bear country, it was all his way of honoring his brother's memory and finding purpose in his pain. Lately, though, Michael had been struggling. Budget cuts meant fewer rangers covering more territory. The increasing number of visitors to the park, while great for conservation funding, also meant more human-wildlife conflicts. Just last month, he'd had to authorize the relocation of a mother bear and her cubs because tourists kept feeding them, making them dangerously comfortable around humans. It broke his heart every time he had to interfere with the natural order of things. Standing there, looking at this crying cub, Michael felt all his professional training warring with his deepest instincts. Protocol said to observe from a distance, call for backup, and wait for the wildlife specialists to handle the situation. But something in those pleading eyes told him that time was a luxury this little cub didn't have. Against every regulation in the book, Michael found himself slowly approaching the cub. "Hey there, little one," he whispered softly, the way his grandfather had taught him to speak to frightened animals. "What's wrong? Where's your mama?" The cub's response was immediate and startling. It began walking toward the forest, then stopped and looked back at Michael, crying even more desperately. When Michael didn't follow, the cub returned to him, gently grabbing the bottom of his ranger uniform with its tiny claws. Not aggressively, but with the same insistence of a child tugging on a parent's sleeve. It was clear the cub wanted him to follow. Every fiber of Michael's training screamed at him to radio for backup, to maintain professional distance and not engage with wildlife in this way. But as he looked into those desperate eyes, he heard his grandfather's voice echoing in his memory. "Sometimes, Michael, the rules we make can't account for the heart of the situation. Sometimes you have to trust what the forest is telling you." Making a decision that could cost him his job, Michael radioed his position to headquarters and reported a wildlife situation requiring investigation. Then, keeping his bear spray ready and his radio within easy reach, he began to follow the small cub into the dense forest. The journey was unlike anything Michael had ever experienced. The cub would walk ahead about 20 feet, then stop and look back to make sure Michael was following. If he fell too far behind, the little bear would return to him, crying piteously and tugging at his uniform again. It was as if the cub understood that this human might be its only hope for salvation. As they went deeper into the wilderness, Michael's mind raced with possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. Had the mother been killed by poachers? Hit by a car on one of the park roads? Was she trapped somewhere, injured, and unable to return to her cub? Or worse, was this some kind of trap, with an angry mother bear waiting to defend her young from what she might perceive as a human threat? The forest grew thicker around them, and Michael realized they were traveling along old game trails that even he, with all his experience, rarely used. The cub seemed to know exactly where it was going, navigating through dense undergrowth and around fallen logs with the confidence of an animal following a familiar path. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes, the cub's behavior changed. Its desperate crying became more urgent, more frantic. It began running ahead, then circling back to Michael, clearly agitated. They were getting close to something. What Michael found in a small clearing ahead made his heart sink to his feet. There, caught in an illegal snare trap that had been cruelly hidden along a game trail, was the cub's mother. The massive black bear was unconscious, probably weakened by days of struggling against the wire that had tightened around her leg. She was severely dehydrated and injured, but still breathing. The illegal snare was the kind used by poachers, designed not just to catch an animal, but to cause maximum suffering. The wire had cut deep into the mother bear's leg, and the more she had struggled to escape, the tighter it had become. It was a miracle she was still alive. Michael immediately understood the full scope of what had happened. This little cub had been staying with its dying mother, probably for days, watching helplessly as she grew weaker. When the cub could no longer wake her up, couldn't get her to move or respond to its desperate cries, it had done the only thing it could think of. It had gone to find help. The intelligence and emotional capacity this demonstrated was staggering. Not only had the cub recognized that its mother needed help beyond what it could provide, but it had somehow understood that humans might be able to provide that help. It had overcome every natural instinct to avoid humans and actively sought one out, then successfully communicated its need and guided Michael to this exact spot. Standing in that clearing, looking at the unconscious mother and her small, hopeful cub, Michael felt the full weight of the moment. This wasn't just about one bear family. It was about the trust this wild creature had placed in him, about the faith it had shown in the possibility that humans could be helpers rather than destroyers. With shaking hands, Michael radioed for emergency veterinary support and the park's wildlife response team. Then, working carefully and speaking in soothing tones to keep the cub calm, he began the delicate process of freeing the mother bear from the snare. The next few hours were a blur of intense activity and desperate hope. The veterinary team arrived by helicopter, carrying specialized equipment for treating large wildlife. Dr. Sarah Chen, the park's head veterinarian, took one look at the mother bear and shook her head grimly.
"She's in critical condition," Dr. Chen told Michael as her team worked to establish an IV line. "Severe dehydration, infection from the wound, probable kidney stress. I'm honestly amazed she's still alive. Most bears wouldn't have survived this long in a snare." The little cub, meanwhile, stayed close to its mother throughout the entire rescue operation. Despite the presence of multiple humans, helicopters, and medical equipment, all things that should have sent a wild bear running in terror, the cub seemed to understand that these people were there to help. It watched every procedure with intelligent eyes, occasionally whimpering softly, but never trying to interfere. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Chen murmured as she worked. "It's like this cub knows we're trying to save its mother. The level of trust and understanding here, it's extraordinary." The team worked for 3 hours to stabilize the mother bear for transport. The snare had caused significant damage, and infection had set in, but there was still hope. If they could get her to the park's medical facility quickly enough, if the antibiotics worked, if her kidneys hadn't been too severely damaged by the dehydration, there were a lot of ifs, but there was still a chance. As the team prepared to airlift the mother bear to the medical facility, a new problem arose. The cub, which had been so cooperative throughout the rescue operation, suddenly became agitated when it realized its mother was being taken away. It began crying desperately and trying to follow the stretcher, clearly terrified of being separated again. "We can't leave the cub here alone," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything it's been through, after the trust it showed in bringing us here, we can't abandon it now." Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "You're right, but transporting a wild bear cub is complicated. There are protocols, paperwork, safety concerns." "I'll take responsibility," Michael said without hesitation. "This cub saved its mother's life by trusting humans. We owe it the same trust in return." What happened over the next 72 hours would challenge everything Michael thought he knew about the relationship between humans and wild animals. The mother bear, whom the team had named Luna, was fighting for her life in the park's medical facility. The infection was severe, her kidneys were stressed, and her injured leg would require surgery to save. The cub, now called Star by the veterinarian team, refused to leave its mother's side. Even in the sterile environment of the medical facility, surrounded by the sounds and smells of human medicine, the little bear maintained its vigil. It slept curled up next to Luna's recovery cage, ate reluctantly when offered food, and watched anxiously every time the medical team checked on its mother. Michael found himself spending every off-duty hour at the facility, partly to monitor Star's well-being, but mostly because he couldn't tear himself away from this incredible display of love and loyalty. The bond between this mother and cub was so powerful that it had overcome the fundamental law of wild animals: avoid humans at all costs. "You know," Dr. Chen said on the second day, as they watched Star gently nuzzle its unconscious mother through the cage bars, "in all my years of veterinary medicine, I've never seen anything like this. The emotional intelligence this cub is displaying, the depth of its attachment to its mother, the trust it's showing in us, it's rewriting everything I thought I knew about bear cognition and emotions." On the third day, something miraculous happened. Luna began to show signs of consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, and the first thing she saw was her cub's face pressed against the cage bars, watching her with desperate hope. The sound Luna made when she saw Star was unlike anything Michael had ever heard from a bear. A low, rumbling vocalization that spoke of relief, love, and an almost human-like gratitude. Star's response was immediate and overwhelming. The little cub began what can only be described as crying tears of joy, making soft chittering sounds while trying to press as close to its mother as the cage would allow. Luna, despite her weakness, managed to reach one massive paw through the bars to touch her cub's face. There wasn't a dry eye among the medical team watching this reunion. Even the most seasoned wildlife professionals were moved to tears by the raw emotion being displayed between these two bears. It was a reminder that love, devotion, and family bonds exist throughout the natural world in ways that humans are only beginning to understand. Luna's recovery was slow but steady. The antibiotics had successfully fought off the infection, and while her injured leg would always be a slightly weaker, Dr. Chen was confident that she would regain full mobility with time. More importantly, the psychological trauma of her ordeal seemed to be healing as well, aided tremendously by Star's constant presence and affection. During the recovery period, Michael spent countless hours observing the interaction between mother and cub. What he saw challenged every assumption he'd held about wildlife emotions and intelligence. Luna clearly understood that humans had saved her life. When Michael approached her cage, instead of the fear or aggression he expected from a wild bear, Luna would look directly at him with what could be described as gratitude. Star had become even more remarkable. The little cub seemed to understand that the medical facility was a place of healing, and it cooperated fully with the veterinarian staff. When Luna needed medication, Star would step back to give the humans room to work. When Luna was sleeping and needed rest, Star would curl up quietly nearby. It was as if the cub had appointed itself as an assistant to its mother's medical care. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Chen told Michael one evening as they watched Star carefully cleaning its mother's healing wound with gentle licks. "We're witnessing a level of emotional sophistication and cooperative behavior that most people don't believe wild animals are capable of. This cub isn't just devoted to its mother, it's actively participating in her care and recovery." The story of Luna and Star had begun to spread throughout the Park Service, and then to wildlife conservation organizations around the world. Scientists, researchers, and behaviorists were requesting footage and documentation of the bear's behavior. What had started as one ranger's decision to trust his instincts had become a significant moment in the understanding of wildlife intelligence and emotion. But for Michael, the scientific implications were secondary to the personal transformation he was experiencing. Watching Luna and Star's journey had rekindled his passion for conservation work and reminded him why he had become a ranger in the first place. These weren't just animals to be managed and protected. They were individuals with complex emotional lives, capable of love, grief, hope, and even trust in their human neighbors. After 2 weeks in the medical facility, Dr. Chen declared Luna ready to return to the wild. Her leg had healed well enough for her to walk without pain, and both bears were showing signs of restlessness that indicated they were ready to resume their natural lives. But the process of returning rehabilitated wildlife to their natural habitat is never simple. The biggest challenge was location. The area where Luna and Star had been found was still potentially dangerous. The illegal snare that had trapped Luna suggested that poachers were active in that region. Michael had led several investigations trying to track down the perpetrators, but so far they hadn't been caught. Releasing Luna and Star back into an area where they might encounter more traps was not an option. After extensive consultation with wildlife biologists and park management, they identified a remote section of the park with abundant natural food sources, minimal human presence, and no history of poaching activity. It was about 30 miles from where Luna had been trapped, but still within the territory where she and Star would be able to thrive. The night before the release, Michael made an unprecedented decision. He asked Dr. Chen if he could spend one final evening with Luna and Star, not as their rescuer or caretaker, but simply as a friend saying goodbye. What happened during that evening would stay with Michael for the rest of his life. As he sat quietly near their recovery enclosure, both bears approached the edge of the cage closest to him. Luna looked directly into his eyes for a long moment, and Michael could swear he saw recognition there, not just of him as an individual, but of what he represented. The help he had provided, the trust he had honored, the dedication he had shown to their welfare.
Star, meanwhile, pressed its small face against the cage bars and made soft, contented sounds that Michael had learned to recognize as the cub's expression of happiness and security. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the three of them simply existed together in peaceful companionship, a human and two wild bears connected by an experience that had changed all of their lives. The morning of the release dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crisp mountain air that makes you grateful to be alive. The transport to the release site went smoothly, with both Luna and Star remaining calm during the journey. It was as if they understood that this was the final step in their journey back to freedom. At the release site, a beautiful meadow surrounded by dense forest with a clear stream running through it, the transport cages were positioned at the edge of the tree line. Michael, Dr. Chen, and a small team of park officials gathered to witness this moment they had all worked so hard to make possible. The plan was simple. Open the cages simultaneously and allow Luna and Star to walk out at their own pace without any pressure or encouragement from the humans. What happened next, however, was anything but simple. When the cage doors opened, Luna emerged first, taking a few cautious steps into the meadow. She tested her injured leg, found it strong enough to support her weight, and then turned back toward the cages. Star bounded out immediately, running to its mother's side with obvious joy at being back in their natural environment. But then something extraordinary happened. Instead of immediately disappearing into the forest as everyone expected, both bears turned toward the group of humans who had helped them. Luna took several steps in Michael's direction, stopping about 10 feet away. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, and Michael felt that same overwhelming sense of communication that had defined their entire relationship. Then, in a gesture that no one present would ever forget, Luna stood up on her hind legs, not in aggression or threat, but in what could only be interpreted as acknowledgement and farewell. Star immediately copied her mother's behavior, standing up beside her in a mirror image of goodbye. Michael, tears streaming down his face, slowly raised his hand in response. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was thanking them or they were thanking him. "Take care of each other." As if they had been waiting for this final exchange, Luna dropped back to all fours and led Star toward the forest. At the edge of the tree line, both bears turned back one last time, and then they were gone, disappearing into the wilderness where they belonged. The release of Luna and Star marked the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. The story of the crying bear cub who led a ranger into the woods captured hearts around the world. The Park Service received thousands of letters and emails from people who had been moved by the tale of trust, love, and cooperation between humans and wildlife. More importantly, the incident had sparked serious conversations about wildlife protection and the ongoing battle against poachers. The illegal snare that had nearly killed Luna was part of a larger problem affecting national parks across the country. Michael's experience became a catalyst for increased funding for anti-poaching efforts and improved emergency response protocols for wildlife in distress. For Michael personally, the experience had been transformative.
The depression and disillusionment that had been weighing him down were replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and wonder. He had witnessed firsthand the incredible intelligence and emotional depth of the animals he had dedicated his career to protecting, and he had been trusted by wild creatures in a way that few humans ever experience. 6 months after the release, Michael was conducting a routine patrol in the area where Luna and Star had been set free, when he encountered something that made his heart skip a beat. Fresh bear tracks near the stream, adult female and cub, but now the cub's tracks were noticeably larger. Star was growing up, thriving in its natural habitat under Luna's expert care. Michael never saw them again directly, but evidence of their continued presence in the area was a constant source of joy for him. Occasionally, other rangers would report sightings of a large female black bear with a growing cub, both appearing healthy and well adapted to their environment. The park's trail cameras eventually captured a few distant images of what appeared to be Luna and Star, confirming that they were not only surviving, but flourishing in their new territory. In one particularly touching photograph, Luna could be seen teaching Star how to fish for salmon in the stream, a crucial skill that would ensure the young bear's independence and survival. The story of Luna and Star became more than just a heartwarming tale of rescue and recovery. It became a powerful example of what's possible when humans choose to see wild animals not as obstacles or resources to be managed, but as individuals worthy of respect, protection, and even friendship. Wildlife biologists who studied the documentation from Luna and Star's case published papers on bear intelligence and emotional capacity that contributed to significant changes in how wildlife management decisions are made. The specific type of snare that had nearly killed Luna was banned entirely from the area, and increased patrols made it much harder for poachers to operate undetected. But perhaps most importantly, the story inspired thousands of people to become more actively involved in wildlife conservation. Donations to park services and wildlife protection organizations increased tremendously, and volunteer programs saw record participation from people who had been moved by the tale of a crying cub's trust in human kindness. Michael began giving presentations about his experience to schools, conservation groups, and park visitors. His message was always the same: wild animals are not so different from us in their capacity for love, loyalty, and hope. They deserve our protection not just because they're part of the ecosystem, but because they are individuals with their own stories, their own relationships, and their own right to exist peacefully in the natural world.
Today, Michael continues his work as a park ranger with a deeper understanding of what he's protecting. Every patrol he conducts, every tourist he educates about wildlife safety, every poaching investigation he pursues is informed by the memory of a small bear cub who trusted him enough to lead him into the wilderness in search of hope. The area where Luna and Star were released has become an informal monitoring site where researchers continue to study bear behavior and family dynamics. The data collected there has contributed to improved wildlife management practices and better understanding of how bear families recover from trauma. Luna and Star's story has also influenced policy at the highest levels. New protocols for wildlife emergency response have been implemented in national parks across the country, ensuring that future situations like theirs can be handled more quickly and effectively. Training programs for park rangers now include specific modules on recognizing and responding to wildlife in distress, using Luna and Star's case as a primary example. But beyond the policies and protocols, the scientific papers and documentaries, the awards and recognition, lies a simpler truth. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single act of trust. Star's decision to seek help from a human stranger, Michael's choice to follow his instincts despite regulations, Luna's recognition of the help she had received. These moments of connection across species lines remind us of what's possible when we approach the natural world with open hearts and minds. As we face increasing challenges in wildlife conservation, habitat loss, climate change, human encroachment, and illegal wildlife trade, stories like Luna and Stars become even more important. They remind us that behind every conservation statistic is an individual animal with its own unique personality, relationships, and will to survive. The trust that Star placed in humans and the way that trust was honored and reciprocated offers a model for how human-wildlife relationships could evolve in the future. Instead of seeing wild animals as problems to be solved or resources to be exploited, we can learn to recognize them as our neighbors in the larger community of life on Earth. The ongoing success of Luna and Star in the wild proves that with proper care, respect, and protection, wildlife populations can recover and thrive even after experiencing significant trauma. Their story is a beacon of hope for conservationists working to protect endangered species and restore damaged ecosystems around the world. Research facilities and wildlife rehabilitation centers now use their case as a training example for how to maintain the wild nature of animals while providing necessary medical care. The balance they struck, helping Luna and Star without making them dependent on humans, has become a model for wildlife rehabilitation programs internationally. What Michael learned from his experience with Luna and Star extends far beyond wildlife management techniques or emergency response protocols. He learned that the natural world is full of individuals, each with their own personality, intelligence, and capacity for relationships that transcend species boundaries. He learned that sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones that go against established protocols, the choices we make when we listen to our hearts instead of our handbooks. Star's desperate plea for help required a human response that was equally desperate in its compassion and commitment. Most importantly, Michael learned that trust is perhaps the most precious commodity in the relationship between humans and wildlife. Once broken, it may never be restored. But when honored and protected, it opens doors to understanding and cooperation that seemed impossible before. The bond between Luna and Star themselves taught everyone who witnessed it about the depth of love and loyalty that exists throughout the animal kingdom. Their relationship demonstrated that family devotion, selfless sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty are not uniquely human traits, but universal aspects of life that connect all living beings. The story of Luna and Star didn't end when they walked back into the forest. It continues every day, in every choice we make about how we interact with the natural world around us. Their legacy lives on in the increased protection for wildlife in national parks, in the expanded research into animal intelligence and emotions, and in the changed hearts of everyone who has heard their story. But most importantly, their story continues through each of us who has been inspired by their example of courage, love, and trust. Every time we choose to see wild animals as individuals deserving of respect rather than obstacles to human convenience, we honor Luna and Star's legacy. Every donation made to wildlife conservation organizations, every vote cast for politicians who prioritize environmental protection, every decision to choose wildlife-friendly products and practices, these actions are part of the ongoing story that began with a crying cub leading a ranger into the woods. The trust that Starr placed in Michael was really trust in all of humanity's capacity for compassion and protection. That trust is now in our hands, and how we honor it will determine the future for countless wild animals around the world. We can choose to be worthy of that trust by supporting conservation efforts, by treating wild spaces with respect, by educating ourselves and others about the intelligence and emotional lives of the animals we share this planet with. We can choose to see every encounter with wildlife as an opportunity to build bridges of understanding rather than walls of fear. The crying bear cub who dragged a ranger into the woods was really calling all of us to follow, to step into the forest of compassion, to trust in the possibility of cooperation between humans and wildlife, and to work together to create a world where stories like Luna and Star's have happy endings not because they're rare, but because they're the norm. Their story broke our hearts, but it also opened them to new possibilities. Now it's up to us to make sure that every crying cub, every trapped mother, every wild animal in need can count on finding the same compassion and dedication that Luna and Star found in the forests of Yellowstone. The woods are calling, and wild animals around the world are still waiting to see if we'll follow. Will you answer their call? If Luna and Star's story moved you, please share it with others who care about wildlife conservation. Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming animal rescue stories, and let us know in the comments about your own experiences with wild animals. Together, we can create a world where trust between humans and wildlife leads to healing, protection, and hope for all living beings.